Welcome to Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President Local 237 Teamsters. Today, our very special guest is Professor Dr. Dorian Warren from Columbia University. Professor Warren, before I introduce you to our audience, let me tell them that you specialize in studying inequality of American politics. Teaching interests include labor organizing and politics, race and ethnic politics, urban politics and policy, American political development, community organizing, public policy, and social science. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You have studied many labor issues, and we are most interested in your assessment of what has been happening today with national and local assaults on municipal workers and union members.
It's tough times for all of us, but especially for public sector workers, because as I've said before, municipal employees and public sector workers are the new welfare queens in American politics. They're the scapegoats that politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, have decided are all of a sudden the source of all of our problems, that we're going to balance state budgets, that we're going to take back pension contributions and obligations. We're going to do everything we need to do to attack public sector workers because they're the real cause of our problems. That's the rhetoric out there today, both from, frankly, President Obama, who I support, but his asking for a federal wage freeze is part of this broader environment, but more especially here in New York with the new governor. We've seen it in New Jersey with Governor Christie, just flat-out attacks on public sector workers. And this is something we have to fight against.
Now, in your opinion, are these attacks warranted?
Absolutely not. They're based on a foundation of myths and lies about salaries, about pensions, about the jobs that public sector workers have. And none of these lies are true. Not one.
Now, to say that, what do you mean by the lies?
So, for instance, one of the lies that's very common is that public sector workers are overpaid and they're living fat off the hog, so to speak. It's just not true. In fact, when you compare workers who work in the public sector with workers who work in the private sector, public sector workers get paid less than their private sector counterparts, on average from somewhere between 3% to 15% less in wages than their private sector counterparts. So that's just, and there have been several studies that have looked at this and come to the same conclusion. Public sector workers, if anything, are underpaid compared to their private sector counterparts. But it doesn't stop people from saying, oh, the public sector workers they make too much. I don't see people running into the public sector. I see people running to go work on Wall Street to make a lot of money. We don't see people running to the public sector to make a lot of money. We see people who want to serve going to the public sector.
So they could say it 3,000 or 3,000 times, it doesn't make it true.
It doesn't make it true. That's right.
And the little known fact that everybody doesn't know is during the 90s, the public sector workers had a 3.5-year wage freeze. And also the first term of Mayor Bloomberg, the first year we got a lump sum payment, which amounted to no wage increase. So there's 4.5 years of wage increases from 1990 to current.
And supposedly good times.
In good times. And the private sector hadn't seen those wage freezes.
That's right.
But now we're seeing a shift because the private sector is feeling it. They're feeling layoffs. Now all of a sudden the public sector has more. No, we don't have more. We've just been here all along. Now all of a sudden we're being scapegoated.
That's right.
Public sector salaries versus private, you've already explained that. But if the governments were able to extract everything they wanted from the municipal workers, would they be able to balance the budgets?
No. Let's say we went back to the full employment program we knew as slavery.
Yes.
Let's say every public sector worker worked for free. Budgets would still have a deficit because the point is that public sector workers' salaries and pensions didn't cause the crisis. The crisis is first and foremost caused by the recession, the crashing of the economy, which bankers on Wall Street caused, and the fact that tax revenue has dried up because people have lost their jobs. So it's not because it's the loss of tax revenue, not because public sector workers make too much. So even if we were to give back everything, there still be a huge budget deficit in states. My home state of Illinois just passed legislation to increase the state income tax from 3 to 5%. That's a different route states can take.
Right.
It's a painful one, but that's shared sacrifice. It's not sacrificing one group of our public servants for rich people. That's shared sacrifice where everybody has to pay a little more. So we could raise the income tax. That's one way to get new revenue, but not the way that most state governments are doing, and that is just scapegoating and demanding concessions from public sector workers.
Now, to illustrate your point even further, Texas has the biggest deficit of all the states.
Yep.
And they do not have unionized public sector workers in Texas.
That's right. Texas is a right-to-work state, which most southern states are, which essentially don't allow unions. And so when you just look at Texas or Alabama or Arkansas or North Carolina or South Carolina, we can go down the list. All these states have budget deficits, but they don't have public sector workers, unionized public sector workers.
Yes.
So if it's really the public sector unions that are causing the problem, it doesn't pass the sniff test when you just look at any southern state. And Texas is a great example. They have a huge budget deficit, probably more of a budget deficit than New York or New Jersey or many of our northern states without public sector unions. So that means the union isn't the cause. It's something else. It's falling tax revenue from the recession.
Now, some of your studies that you've mentioned, can you tell us where these studies began, how long you were researching this study? Because this problem seemed to have sprung up, and we're really at the, I would say, pinnacle of this problem. But you have been doing this for how many years?
About 10 years now. I've been studying mostly the labor movement in low-wage work. So I study hotel workers, for instance, and their attempts to organize, or hospital workers or textile workers. And I came to thinking about and studying public sector workers because it's very personal for me. My mother is a retired school teacher in Chicago, public school teacher.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I worry every day about her pension,
Yes.
if she's going to have a pension left. What's really interesting to me, and not just interesting but mysterious, is how fast teachers have been villainized in the media. I mean, 10 years ago, teachers weren't the cause of our education problems in our public schools.
No.
Today, that's the first thing off any politician's mouth. Oh, it's the teachers' unions that's the problem. Really?
Yes.
Teachers are all of a sudden the problem to decades of underfunded schools, to poor performance. And all of a sudden, people care about black and brown children in particular, or working class children more broadly. Now, all of a sudden, we care about their educational outcomes. 10, 15, 20 years ago, nobody cared. And now it's just, anyway, the point I'm trying to make is how fast teachers' unions were scapegoated is a signal to all public sector employees what's coming. They were scapegoated and made villains in less than a decade. And now there's an attempt to make all public sector workers the villain. So that's what I'm studying now, is trying to understand the political rhetoric around demonizing public sector workers and why it has such resonance. One reason is because there's this crab in the crab box mentality, that many workers who have been losing out the last 30 years in the private sector because the top 1% have been taking so much more from them. Right. They look at their public sector counterparts and say, oh, you have a decent job. You make a living wage. You have health care and a pension. Instead of saying, that's great and I want that too, and how can I get a union at my workplace, they say, oh, no, you can't. If I can't have it, you can't have it. So then they pull down on their neighbors and their counterparts.
It's sort of the race to the bottom.
It is the race to the bottom for everybody.
This is all the time we have for this segment.
We were just getting started.
We were just getting started. You know what? Maybe we'll have you back.
That'd be great. That'd be great.